Hello there, Reject Nation. I'm Greg Alba.
And I'm John Humphrey.
We are going to do another video podcast movie review of a classic film called Lost Horizon, which is kind of a lost classic film. Usually I tell people lately, it's a Frank Capra movie, a guy who did the director of It Happened One Night.
The Punisher.
The Punisher. And didn't get the joke at first.
Sorry, it was poorly inserted.
I get it now, John. And it's he also did Mr. Deeds Goes to Washington. And then this movie was one of those, I forget the exact history of how a lot of this went down. It's actually explained on the Blu-ray that we have. And my girlfriend, Olivia, is very much familiar with this time in history of, like, there was a time where some studios, I think it was multiple studios, I could be wrong, feel free to correct me, with hatred, pure hatred, about
You're an idiot!
yeah, about how there was a lot of film reels that were just burnt, and then according to, it's been a few weeks since I've seen the movie, but I think the text at the beginning was saying that it was UCLA and Sony Pictures worked together on restoring this film, and it looks great. There's some moments in here where it's just stills because they couldn't successfully restore it, but they had the whole soundtrack. So they have the whole audio throughout. And for there's only a few minutes, like literally out of a 2-hour and 13-minute movie, there's only a few minutes that it's just stills. So for most of it, it's all back here.
And this is theoretically the most comprehensive cut that exists now, because there have been many cuts over time of this movie, some ranging from a little over an hour and a half to this one that's like slightly over 2 hours. So there's a lot that's been added back into this.
And I do want, if you happen to make it to this point in the video, I would like to encourage you guys to actually, listen to what we're going to talk about. Because if you haven't even seen the movie, and we will go into some spoilers, I think that's okay. I'm going to reveal something that I've never done this before. See, a while ago we watched a movie, not a movie, a YouTube video called from a guy who's titled "Why I'm Not Afraid of Spoilers," and in it he talked about how he sometimes will go on Wikipedia or something and then read the description of the plot, and then watch the movie. And at the time when I watched this, I was kind of in a really tired state. And adjusting my mind to classic films can sometimes be a little bit rougher for me, and just for my mentality to be fully absorbed. So I read the plot description for this, and I forgot most of it. and honestly, it's one of those films that when you read the plot description, it's still confusing. You're like, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to understand this. I don't even get what I just read. Because it's such a weird movie that I when I read it, I'm like, okay, I think I got it. All right. So even when I watched this, I was still very much surprised by so much that happens in this movie. And so my point to that is that even if we spoil this film for you guys, I think you can go back and watch it and still heavily appreciate this movie. It's a 1937 film. It's not one of those like, oh, hell-bent on twists and stuff. There's like one big reveal at the end. But other than that, it's still, it's up to you if you want to stick around.
The journey is worth it.
Absolutely, because the details of the beauty of this film are in the journey. One of our top reward tiers on Patreon is whatever video anyone requests, whether that be a discussion, podcast of sorts, or a reaction, we will do and put up on YouTube, assuming it doesn't get blocked, that reaction. And today comes from our dear friend, David Gandy. Love you, man. And he actually we did Maltese Falcon, and he sent that DVD over to us, the Blu-ray, and now he introduced us to this movie. So not only is he one of our top pledges on Patreon, a dear friend, he's also sending us classic Blu-rays. So
I'm getting our film education.
And now he's sending us his account and routing number so we can just steal from him directly.
We just write ourselves checks, buy all the DVDs we want,
all the film equipment upgrades. Thank you for lending us your money,
your identity, your livelihood, really.
So this movie, Lost Horizon, 1937 film, and I gotta tell you guys, it's not often I watch especially a movie from this time period, that I watch one and I find myself halfway going, I think I love this movie. And I genuinely love this movie, because it had been a few weeks. I went back and went to 3 specific scenes in this film, because there was a couple things I wanted to write down, and I just found myself, as I was writing down notes, just watching it again. And I was like, damn, I this really is like just a really good movie. Yeah.
Yeah, man, and it has an aura about it that really is easy to get sucked into, especially just due to what the film itself is about. Like, you're being brought into, through the characters, this fantastical utopian world, and like, it is really easy to be dazzled by that, even if, you know, it is much older in sensibility, and, you know, it's in black and white and all that stuff. Like,
if you've seen the movie or if you haven't, just IMDb lists the plot description. I always read from IMDb because there's professionals who are hired to write an intriguing log line. So it's not me just being lazy. It's the best there is. So might as well just go up. Yeah. And it says a plane crash delivers a group of people to the secluded land of Shangri-La, which I think is a made up word. But is it the miraculous utopia it appears to be?
Fun fact, Shangri-La is like, you know...
It's a town in L.A.
Yeah, yep, and it's a strip club, I'm sure. That is just, you know, it's a word that you've probably heard thrown around a million times that just, you know, sort of is a stand-in for any sort of miraculous utopian place.
Oh, is it? I didn't know.
Yeah, that's the word that's just sort of seeped its way into culture. And I didn't realize when watching this that the book and, you know, the movie by proxy is where that term comes from.
Oh.
I thought it was just a term that existed, but it's from this source material.
Well, it's one of the few, out of the thousands upon thousands of films that have come out in the U.S., it's one of the few films that is in the National Film Registry. The Godfather's in this. It's part of the National Film Registry at the Library of Congress for culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant in history. Yeah. So it goes to show you the importance of this movie. And so the main character in this film is a man played by Robert Conway, and the character is named same first letter, so it's kind of confusing. I read it wrong. That's what I mean. Ronald Coleman is the actor, and the character he plays is a man named Robert Conway. Yeah. It's the RC part of his name that gets me confused all the time. Like, wait, which one is it again? Yeah.
Real easy. You can keep all the monogrammed props that are on set.
Yeah, so in the beginning of this movie, he's basically in China, and he has a mission to rescue 90 Americans or Westerners in the city of Baskul, and he's set to become the new foreign secretary.
Yeah, he's basically bringing a bunch of British nationals back so that he can, you know, A, rescue them, and B, take his place as, you know, a diplomat.
Yeah, and so at the beginning of this movie, I was already impressed from the very beginning, because for a 1930s movie, when you a lot of times what will surprise me is budget with these films, and then you kind of get thrown into this like chaotic situation, which looking back at the film is a brilliant setup of setting you in this time where there's so much chaos in this specific part of the world where he has to rescue these people, and you're looking at it and it's like, wow, look at all these extras. There's so many extras. It's so many. And nowadays you get a lot of digitalized, you know, extras, which is a good way to save money and probably healthier for everyone involved too, who are actual background actors. Because when you see movies like this, I always start to question it, because there's several scenes in here too with amount of extras or non-American actors where I tend to go, were these guys paid? Were they treated well? Right. You know?
Or are these just people you're like, hey, you want to be in a movie for a couple minutes? Go over.
Yeah, exactly. You know? And in the beginning of the movie, immediately it sets off on this like real anxious state. And the main character that Robert Coleman plays, who's fantastic in this movie. I'll say part of why I loved it is because for a film that's from like, I don't know, I'm not doing math well, like 90 years ago or something. Yeah, from that long ago, it felt surprisingly modern, and I couldn't tell if like when they restored it, if they decided to, you know, do a little bit more editing. Then I researched it a little bit more today, and I'm like, oh, that's just how they shot it. Frank Capra went through a lot of film on this movie. Like this film went insanely over budget and was considered a financial disaster when it first came out, because normally when you watch movies from this time period, even as other films like It Happened One Night, for example, there's not a lot of cutting. It's usually heavily reliant on the screenplay and and usually the leads, primarily the male lead, but it's usually the leads that it's reliant on, like the performances and the writing and the directing is fairly simple in terms of camera angles. And in the first act of this movie, you're primarily on the plane that's leaving China. Yeah. and this is where you get to know the main characters. Our main character, who's like really unsatisfied with life, even though he's doing very well. He's got a real repressed, sarcastic sense of humor. I don't know why I identify with this guy. So he has it's really suppressed sense of, so he's very charming. He's very funny. He has a brother, I'm assuming a younger one, who really looks up to him. And then in the plane, you start to get to know the rest of the ensemble.
At least their personalities, yeah.
Yeah, and immediately, a few things I really noticed was the script. The script, very solid, very energetic, and every one of these characters has a very distinct voice.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I always appreciate in films today, but for back then especially, where it's not all, hey, you know?
Yeah, see?
Like everyone had a sense of mystery behind them, specific purposes for what they were doing, specific backgrounds, and I mean, being adapted from a novel lends itself to that advantage, but to see it translated to a screen was beautifully done. And I especially noticed that with a lot of the first act primarily taking place in this plane, there's a lot of different angles. There's a lot of specific choice of symmetry here. There's a lot of specific editing that goes on in here.
Yeah, it's like they actually had to think like, okay, how can we make this one pretty cramped space still engaging, still have rhythm with the tone of the dialogue and all that stuff, because there is a lot of character interplay that's happening, and that's kind of what carries the first chunk of the movie, because it's also, you know, vitally important once they get to Shangri-La, where everybody comes from and what all their sensibilities are, because everybody kind of gets tested by what Shangri-La is to begin with.
Yes, because leading up to Shangri-La, what happens is you discover that their pilot is actually is a Chinaman. Yeah, that's the way the film treats it.
To borrow that antiquated term. Yeah. Their plane's basically been like hijacked, and they don't exactly know why, and they can't communicate to the pilot.
Yeah,
and
he's portrayed as like a villain.
Yeah,
and he's got his gun.
Yeah, well, because
he's kidnapped them.
I feel like there's that shot in the beginning where they like pan up to the cockpit window and he's like strangling the original pilot and stuff like that.
So it's building up this mystery and this darkness, and then the plane crashes in like the Himalayan mountains or something, and then the pilot's dead. Yeah. So. Sucker.
We're stranded here.
So you're really setting up for kind of a dark, stranded mystery adventure. Yeah. And then it's not long, and then because of Robert Coleman's
Ronald
Coleman. Yeah, I got the names. Ronald Coleman is the actor. Robert Conway. I'm just going to call him Conway. All right, Conway. Conway, the character. Conway takes it upon himself to, he has to lead this. Lead the people here who are all in a state of panic right now, and they're most likely going to die. And then really soon after, there's a bunch of people who look like natives of this land.
Yeah, there's basically like a little train of people who come out and find them who look kind of like they expected them.
Yeah,
in a way.
And they're not just a bunch of Caucasian people. No. I'm not even sure exactly what ethnicity. I think it's supposed to imply they're Chinese still. And but the main guy led by them is a man named Chang, played by H.B. Warner, who is also amazing in this movie. The two standouts to me are the lead. Conway, the character, and Chang, the character. So then they're taking on this journey, going through the mountains in this hidden land, this hidden utopia of sorts called Shangri-La, which is a very peaceful place. And when you get there, everyone's just very peaceful. But of course, the people going into this land, our characters, are like
the Westerners.
What's going on
here?
The
Westerners trained to be suspicious.
Who are these savages?
What is this weird society they have going on? Could any of this be true? Have we been kidnapped for a reason? Is this just some kind of happenstance?
So it really sets you up for this very, very dark mystery and probably some crazy unraveling of evil that's really at play here, because you're in the mindset of the Westerners in this moment. Because as you're primarily, everyone's very suspicious. Everyone's suspicious and on guard, and there's one person who's curious and intrigued by the mystery of it all, and that's our main character, which makes it so delightful.
Throughout the film, he's the one guy who's like, I don't know, I think this is pretty cool. Yeah. So I'm going to check it all out. You guys can be as grumpy as you want.
He wants to learn more. There's this hidden world, and the production design of it, even for just looking at it in the format now, there's for 1930s film, you're like, man, did they build this?
Yeah.
What is this? This is crazy. I kept asking myself, nowadays you see something like that and it's easy to fathom, like, oh, here's probably how they made this. Back then, you go, how did they make this?
Yeah.
Film was fairly new, you know?
Yeah,
Color in movies was just being introduced, you know? Like, how did they put this together, you know?
Yeah, man. Well, and some of that, I mean, I know the valley itself that Shangri-La is actually, they shot that up in Ojai Valley, California,
Okay.
which is like an hour and a half or so away from here.
So you can visit Shangri-La in California.
At least parts of it, you probably sure can. I mean, I don't know if the actual like palatial structures that like Chang and the llama are in, you know, basically the place where they're all centered. I don't know if that is there, but I know the actual valley itself.
Mm-hmm. And then as the film unfolds, basically what starts to happen when they're here is a lot of the Westerners, excluding one guy who is the brother of Conway, the Westerners start to, you know, they have their suspicions, but then little things, just real simple natured things of life start to make them adjust to here. What started off as a place where they're stranded and then they're rescued starts to feel like they're kidnapped, yet they're adjusting to the lifestyle.
Well, yeah, because they're brought into this place and it's, you know, obviously foreign, but what starts to happen is, you know, they have these rituals and they have this claim basically that here in Shangri-La we have this society that is very much based on merit and moderation and whatnot, and we also have just like I don't know, just this aura of health. It's like you don't deteriorate here, and that's a lot for everybody to kind of take in, but over time, you know, as the characters initially are opposed, they all start to come around to it in their own way when they see something come out of it that matches what they're looking for.
But the movie does such a good job at making you wonder, okay, yeah, but what's really up?
Yeah,
the whole time.
The whole
You're like,
time.
yeah, okay, what's really up? So what happened, really quick, like when the movie really started to hardcore connect with me was when I started realizing how much deeper this movie is. And this is when I went to, there's this a good chunk of the movie, like it's like 10 to 15 solid minutes of this where Conway is being educated on the history of Shangri-La, that there was like a priest, I believe, who eventually becomes the high lama of him, who basically found the land, built this utopia, lived to be like 200 years old, and when he was there, so basically when he was, sorry, I'm trying to look at my notes here. So now that they have this utopia there, and then they start talking about that they live on a principle of moderation, because Conway, as a man who's fascinated by this, wants to know a little bit more about it. And then as he's learning about it, they say, what are your religious beliefs? You know, basically asking all the Western cultures. How do you live? How do you make money? What do you do about people who are, you know, behaving on a hand? Do you have a jail system? Soldiers, security? What about, you know, like all these things? And Chang, and the reason I love his performance so much in this is because he's so matter of fact about everything. He's just so sincere. They're both very sincere performers on two different levels, because the guy who plays Chang easily could have taken the approach of act a little suspicious, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
He's just so like
he's
authentic
just so
about
warm
it.
about everything. He's very calm about everything and just kind of eerily reassuring all the time.
You know, then they start talking about their philosophies, and this becomes into a philosophical discussion. That's when I started going, whoa, this movie's fucking deep. I didn't expect this.
Yeah.
Because he's asked, like, what are your religious practices? And Chang says, we practice moderation. And everything's just about moderation. And he's like, well, what makes a criminal? Lack, envy. There can be no crime when there is a sufficiency of everything. And how little courtesy all around helps to smooth out even the biggest of problems. So when they're talking about that element, they start going into a little bit more of things, because even they're talking about how when they get food supplies, which happens over the course of several years, that they don't call it buy and sell, they just call it exchange. It's like little tweaks in vocabulary about perspective, and they're talking about where they're at in the climate, that because of the kind of water they have, that they're a lot healthier, they're able to live for longer. They're talking about how the way they live is primarily based off of the absence of struggle. And then he starts talking about Westerner quotes, like, have you ever heard the quote, he worries himself to death, which is a popular Western quote. And there was one line here, and I went through the movie to make sure I wrote it down correctly, where Chang says, the Westerners' lives are shorter not so much by natural death, but by indirect suicide. Because everything is primarily how we take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, and mentally, and that's pretty much what Shangri-La does well, is they do all that very well, why they can live for longer. I don't know, no real scientific basis
It's
here,
like a total
but the
harmony.
philosophy about it.
Yeah, it's
you
like
know?
a place where everybody exists in total harmony and there is no major unrest or dis-ease of any kind.
Yeah, exactly. Because what is disease when the body is not at ease?
Exactly.
And this movie heavily plays into that philosophy. So what was interesting about it is as the movie keeps going, you get to a point where you're like, I don't think there's anything up with this place.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I think it's just as good as they're making it out to be. Yeah.
And then you're sitting there going, but there's got to be some kind of
Yeah.
conflict or something.
Because I'm like,
right?
shit, that's my Western mentality right there.
This
Yeah.
sounds like a great place
Like,
to be.
for an American movie to do that, to make me go, no. I'm like, oh shit, I'm these guys. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's like, yeah, it puts you in the position because I think that's a brilliant thing about this movie and the way it'll probably hit a lot of people is, yeah, just naturally, you're suspicious.
Yeah.
Getting to know all this stuff, especially when you hear how great it is. And also, too, the element of fantasy that plays in when they're like, this person's been here since 1880, whatever. They must be, it's supremely old. And it's those things that play in your mind and that
Yes.
make you go, no, something's got to be up here. And that's kind of a brilliant element to this movie, especially the way it unfolds toward the end, when it actually does something about that expectation for you.
In my life today, I've recently discovered some audio of a speaker named Simon Sinek, which is kind of a funny last name for a guy who's so positive. And he's like an idealist, and he really strives for helping to develop a future where people love going to work, where employers and CEOs and all that are really about, taking care of their employees and really, taking care of the people around you. It sounds like very corny, cliche stuff, but if you dive into more details about it, you start to see that it was really his perception of trying to form the world. And in the movie, Conway eventually gets to meet the Dalai Lama. It comes to find out he's alive. And by the way, it's a great sequence because it's like people are early on in the movie, before everyone starts adjusting, and only Conway's the one adjusting to this and wants to stay here. Everyone else is like, we gotta get out of here. There's something wrong. I don't like this. I want to get back to my hometown, Everyone's just fucking mad.
Yeah. Glory's like, I'm dying. I gotta get out of here. And then the guy who plays Uncle Billy in It's a Wonderful Life maybe doesn't want to leave, but, then you've got the archaeologist who's, like, stuffy and scared all the time, and everybody has a reason they need to go.
So Chang decides to let him meet the Dalai Lama. Come to find out, this is the guy who...
Lama.
The High Lama, sorry, yeah. Well, it seems inspired by it. Yeah. So when it comes time to meet him, he finds out it's the guy who is the...
He's the priest who came.
He's the priest who found this. He's 200 years old now. And it comes across a little creepy because he's 200 years old, but he's really a nice guy.
Yeah, and they're even great at making him seem like he is, like, extremely old without even...
doing well for his age.
Yeah, exactly. Without, at least the advanced makeup and effects capabilities we have now. And in that way, he does convincingly come across as this sort of ethereal, aged being.
Yeah, and I love the way the sequence was shot, because when Conway first walks in, they just keep doing two shots, like not two shots, single shots. Mm-hmm. One shot of Conway, one shot of this guy, and then once Conway realizes that this is the guy who found it, then they go to this two shot, and that's when they decide to do the master shot of them. And then there's like a candle in between them in this dark room. Yeah. Like, I don't know, something, how you want to interpret it, but something about illuminating life.
The light between them.
Yeah, exactly, Yeah. And it was beautifully done. Like, that's what I mean. There's a lot of intentional cinematography here, a lot of very specific shots here. And I guess in a weird way, it's sort of an inspiring movie. Like, you start going through a lot of plot elements. We're not going to, even though we broke down a lot of, like, what led to a lot of these moments, because a lot of stuff starts happening. I'll give you, like, some basic Wikipedia kind of breakdown of it. Eventually, the brother, he really wants to get out. There's this woman there who has been living there for a while, but she wasn't born there. Everyone who's basically born there doesn't have a desire to leave, because this is a place that's really not about desire or struggle or trying to achieve success or whatever.
Yeah.
Everything's very equal.
No
you know?
use for all that
There's,
stuff.
exactly. There's no use for any of that. That's why they can live forever, because they don't have all this fucking worry and all this like things that I'm like, man, that'd be great. and instead of making YouTube videos. so eventually, because he's kind of torn between the High Lama wants Conway to take over and be the new leader, because he's an author. Conway, he's written in all these books.
Well, and this matches directly with what he wants out of life. And actually, I read there's a speech that he gives in this movie about being tired of all these, basically all the Western concerns, being like tired of money and going out. And even though he's so popular and so successful, this isn't a fulfilling life for him. And so he plays, all of Shangri-La plays to that. And there's a speech he gives about that idea, being sick of, his life back home that's so great, that they took out originally and then put back in, which is kind of a...
Studios kept trimming this movie.
Yeah.
Original cut was 6 hours.
And, I mean, fair enough. But that is sort of a thesis of this movie that does help a lot, because a lot of it is them playing to that side of him where it's like, this is the kind of life you want to be living, truly.
Yeah.
And you are the person to carry it on for us because of that.
Yeah, exactly. Because the High Lama has some really powerful speeches too that are very deep. There's one moment there where he's talking along the lines of, how weapons will evolve, which they did, and unintelligible leadership, which we often have. and he's talking about how the Christian belief will one day be fulfilled when the strong have devoured one another. We'll all have to live by one principle, a very simple one, of be kind, be loving to one another, and so the meek shall inherit the earth, basically, is what they're getting at here.
And Shangri-La is this attempt to basically, at this moment in time, take all of the most, precious or, qualitative things and preserve them here until such a time as that comes to pass, and then we can bring the whole world in.
Yeah, it's like they're like the guy who's the archaeologist. He discovered something at the beginning of the movie that he wanted to bring back to his home country so he can try to win a Nobel Prize and all that shit. And then he discovers that he'd rather just stay here and be a teacher to these children. Really educate them, teach them about geology. Yeah. And then there's a scam, not the scam art, the con artist.
Yeah, the swindler. Yeah. He's there and he's like, well, I mean, if I go back home, I'm just gonna get arrested and stuff like that. But then he comes back because he initially wants to steal gold.
Yeah,
from
he finds out
Shangri-La.
that Shangri-La has a high amount of gold, and that's how they make their exchanges for more food and stuff, because they don't really care for the gold.
Yeah, exactly.
And at first he's like, I can sell the gold.
Yeah, and then eventually even he comes around and he's like, I've got this whole plumbing system. We're going to have running water down to the village. It's going to be great, And Gloria, who's the woman, she doesn't really...
She's not really much of a character.
She doesn't get to be that much of a character, but she is terminally ill, and then even she comes around. She's like, I feel better. She and the swindler guy are actually getting along and making plans together and stuff.
But then there's the brother who wants no part of this, and then he starts a relationship with one of the women who was not born there. She eventually found her way there, and then stayed there. But she has this idea, because this is when the movie decides to go, oh shit, Shangri-La is fucked up. Damn. Yeah. Like I forget the woman.
Shoe drops.
Yeah,
Maria.
Maria. I think that's the name is coming to mind. Yeah, Maria. Maria. When Maria and George, and Maria's basically the one affirming George's beliefs of, they're messed up here, they're manipulative. Basically all the things you often hear about places that are usually pretty positive. So,
she's the one who feels like a prisoner and wants to leave. And
she wants more. She wants all the things that basically are that she's kind of a representation of all the antithesis to the things that they're talking about at Shangri-La.
Well, and the fact that even in a place like this, these ideas can grow.
Exactly.
Somebody can be discontent with all this.
And because this is Conway's brother, he decides he's gonna leave. And which is not at all what he wants. There's a woman there who's the reason why he's even brought there, how he was introduced, named Sandra. She's the main female lead, and she's basically just all about Robert Conway.
Yeah, basically.
It's 1930s. Women were not running well back then, for the most part. All right,
but it plays on an interesting, at least with him and the brother and the conflict there. It does play on something interesting because George's whole point is like, you just let them entice you with this promise of a utopia without any real evidence. But I got this girl here who says like it's completely fucked up. But they're kind of doing the same thing because you realize after a while he didn't really have a ton of actual evidence either. He just had her word.
Exactly.
And then Conway has, the llama and Chang's word.
And it's a battle for beliefs.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's
conviction.
That's where a lot of it just comes down to in this movie. And what I'll say is that the debates in the movie are written very well. Because even when he comes in and when George and Maria come in, I'm like, okay, was that what it is? Yeah, they were fucked up. Yeah. They have to be. I didn't want it to be you, but yeah. So then they end up leaving the mountains. There's this great reveal. This wonderful because they're in this secluded part of like Shangri-La's fucking hidden. All right.
Yeah.
So then there's outsiders who think that people in Shangri-La are fucking crazy, and the
porters.
Yeah, the outsiders are they're helping them get back so that way they can find their way back to their home country. And then along the journey, when they're encountering the dangers of nature and the snows and the blizzards, at one point, Conway is carrying this bitch. It's carrying Maria, the whiny girl who wanted to get out of Shangri-La. And then George is like, "Wait, look at her face!" and it's this great makeup, and it's scary. It's actually like a scary moment because she's fucking old.
She's old
and that's what
wizened,
Chang was warning her about. Like, she can't leave because she's gonna. Her age will the climate, the weather, everything is just gonna catch up to her, and then she's gonna just age and die.
Oh yeah, well there's that beautiful thing where when he's being introduced to all this, he's talking to Chang, I think it is, and he's like, yeah, if she were to leave, she would just age to her appropriate age, and that's what would happen, when she leaves the boundaries of here. And it's just one of the little details of how Shangri-La works, but it becomes, this huge reveal.
And it was a good visual reveal because that's the moment where you go, everything in Shangri-La is real.
Yeah.
It's her death that makes you go, oh my god, they were telling the truth. Because this woman was young, and now she's fucking old.
And we are stranded out here with no porters, nobody.
And because of George's I took it as just like, he just can't believe any of this. His whole world's flipped upside down. He was kind of into this chick. He just kills himself right there. Right away, just fucking kills himself. And then our main character, Conway, is stranded. It's kind of a bummer. It's a downer because you're like, oh man, it's gonna be one of those endings.
I was literally yelling at the TV. I was like, no!
After all that, you're just gonna make him suffer.
They really do a convincing job with that piece of the movie because they for a minute had me going that he's gonna die in the snow. He shouldn't have left. It's gonna be a cautionary tale that he shouldn't have left.
And then eventually he's found by a Chinese mission where a search party is looking for him, and he's brought back to what is his home? Is it America? I couldn't tell if he was British or American.
No, this is all, I believe, UK stuff because when they're getting on the plane, they're like, "We're the Queen's royal subjects," or something.
Okay, yeah, because he is British. All right.
But yeah, he's found by a Chinese mission and is initially gonna be transferred back and then just escapes.
Well, let me break this down for you. All right.
Yeah.
I want to read to you what Wikipedia says about it.
Okay.
I'm gonna go into this. All right. So it says the ordeal has caused him to lose his memory of Shangri-La. On the voyage back to England, he starts to remember everything. He tells his story, then jumps ship. The searchers track him back to the Himalayas, but are unable to follow him any further. I'll stop right there. There's one more sentence.
Yeah.
What's funny about that? You don't see any of that. You don't see what you end up getting is, I don't know which character it is, but there's some guy who's been trying to hunt this motherfucker down. And he's been just following him. He's always just like, dude, almost there, but this guy's always one step ahead. And there's even way more to this journey.
Oh yeah.
This guy goes on a tangent, like a fucking monologue, talking about the journey that Conway went on, the amount of being captured and breaking out and having to do this and having to do that. He's going on for a while where I'm like, that'd be a whole fucking interesting movie right there. Like that's a whole movie, right?
Yeah. Well, and I bet that was probably part of the 6-hour runtime. They were like, dude, replace this with a monologue.
Just have replace it with a monologue. We don't have time for this shit.
This is like a whole 40 minutes.
Which made me go, if I were to ever remake Lost Horizon, I wouldn't remake Lost Horizon. I would just tell this movie. I would just start off with that. This guy's brought back to his home country. He doesn't remember, and then he starts to remember, and then you kind of have this perspective of this guy, of people going, dude, you're crazy. That's insane. So it's his journey to get back to this place that he believes is real, that no one else believes is real. And then by the end of the movie, you find out, oh shit, it's real.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, that would be my remake right there.
Return to Shangri-La.
Yeah, but so it's not like redoing any of this movie. It's just telling the story that was just in a fucking monologue.
Yeah.
Because by the end of the movie, you see Conway. He's traveling through the mountains, and then he sets his eyes upon Shangri-La one more time, showing he successfully made it back.
Yeah.
And David Gandy did send me a question of like, do I think that it would have been more effective or would have been better if we didn't see him return to Shangri-La? And no, I personally love the choice that you do see him. Like, would have been upset. I would have been pissed. I'm like, after all that, and we're like, oh, it's just left up to interpretation whether he made it back alive, you know?
Because that's what I thought they were gonna do, and after the reaction they got out of me when I thought he was just gonna die in the snow, at that point I was like, you know what, you've earned this. I'm really glad that he made it back.
Yeah, it's not like he comes back with open arms and he's like, look at me, I'm the king, you know?
Yeah,
he just sees it, so you're like, okay, he's made it back.
It was funny. There was an alternate ending on the DVD that I watched where it's roughly the same, but he comes back and Sandra's just there waiting for him, like waving, like, hey, come on up. Like, so yeah, I appreciate that they just went with the ending where he just finds it again. That's it. That's all.
Yeah.
There's no like romantic button on it, because like the cool thing about this movie overall is there's so much intrigue. There's a lot of philosophy about Western society and what a utopia might look like, but there's also a ton of intrigue. There's romance. There's action. There is kind of a sci-fi element.
Well, it's a fantasy.
To it.
It's a fantasy.
Yeah, it's a
element.
fantasy.
It's a fantasy.
Yeah. It's got this. You
but it's very grounded, though.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, like feeling like it wasn't very hard to slip into this, as a classic movie, as an older movie with older sensibilities. And I feel like, it really is of a timeless variety of Hollywood movie that has every kind of thing in it.
Well, I mean, for its time, it was the most expensive movie ever made at that point, and it kind of shows. Yeah. And because like Frank Capra, like fucking burns through film, like this. He went fucking mad for a little while after this, and like you hear the story behind it that I didn't know till way after watching this movie. Of man, this guy fucking struggled with this movie because it was a fucking failure at first, but when you watch it, you're like, this feels like very modern. Even just watching clips back, I'm like, of course, there's some of its 1930s aesthetic stuff, but the film is very much like edited. It's very much composed, and the acting is so good. Like, there's some damn good acting in this movie. It doesn't feel like overperformance kind of acting. It's very sincere performances. And I was very much impressed, very much enthralled. And I was pretty surprised by how I was in the shoes of the Westerners. And I was like, man, this point even hits home harder that it's 90 years later and we are still these people. Like that's the funny part to me, is like, these people they're talking about that they're portraying of the Westerners still exist. They're never going to stop existing. And the times they're talking about how the world will evolve and what it will turn into in a cynical way, it's happened. Yeah. Like that's just the facts.
Well, and around that time, I'm sure people were thinking that too. I feel like that is a message that keeps this film timeless, because I think no matter, unless we happen to achieve a utopian society anytime soon, you'll always be able to look around and be like, yeah, they were right, and they're still right.
Well, like reading up on this, people were like laughing at this movie when it first came out. Like there were scenes in here that were serious that people just laughed at. And
there were moments here where I think I was sitting here going, did this get anybody like blacklisted, or did anybody get in trouble? Because there, are some like socialist ideas in here. Yeah. And that may be a little bit before the time, but there's a lot of that, like being free of capitalism and personal possession.
I weirdly feel like now it would be more, if this movie came out now, it would be more accepted than back then, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
Not like, I mean, if you made it like in a weird way, because I feel like we're more of a culture that is more drawn to the kind of ideas and messages portrayed in this movie now, as opposed to back then.
Yeah.
Which was like the rise of capitalism and all that, So, yeah, it's funny, man. It's funny. Anyway, this is a great movie. And David, I want to thank you for because this is a film that stuck with me. It really has stuck with me. And it's a movie that a lot of people haven't heard of, too. A lot of people haven't heard of this movie. I bring it up with Schmodown people, movie fights people, and they're like, what's that? It's a forgotten movie, maybe because it was burned and lost for a long time. But, looking through some credentials other than the National Register that I was talking about earlier, it is on AFI's, like, a lot of its best 100 years, 100 movies, 100 years of film scores. It's a treasure of a film, and I really do. If you haven't seen it in a long time, go rewatch it, and if you haven't seen it, you happen to sit through it, go watch it. It is very much ahead of its time. A very deep movie and a beautiful story, and a movie that manages to have subtle conflict at its bookends. Because it's funny when you're out of Shangri-La, it's just a nightmare. It's like when you're not in Shangri-La, it's anxiety driven, it's chaotic, it's harsh. Not just in the Himalayan mountains, but just like when you're in China, even when you're back in the country, like it's just like it's just a different energy,
Yeah, totally.
And then Shangri-La, where you keep expecting conflict because what we're conditioned to, there's no conflict.
Yeah,
except for the conflict we create.
Well, there's lots of room and space and air and stuff like that.
You can feel it. The environment is felt. Even within a film in black and white, it's felt. Alfonso Cuarón would love this movie. All right, guys. Well, thanks for sitting through all this. If you're listening to all this, really appreciate it. What's a classic film that you feel like no one really regards anymore or talks about that should be talked about more? Put it in the comments below. You guys can subscribe to the Reject Nation, click that notification bell, and check us out on Patreon. Peace.